Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me for another restful episode of true, scary stories to help you fall asleep. Today, we're going to be reading true creepy encounter horror stories. I hope you enjoy them. So now, without further ado, lay back, relax, and enjoy these true, scary stories. Hello, everyone. My name is Minister K. I'm a non-denominational preacher here in Alabama. I haven't always been a man of God, though. I've had my share of ups and downs, as life is merely a learning experience where we are all forced to make mistakes in order to learn and achieve our God-given potential. Life is one big fight. Life is filled with many battles. One of my many battles took place in August of 2016, a battle that, quite frankly, would change my life forever. When I was young, I lost both of my parents tragically. My mother died in a house fire, and my father of a heart attack. This caused me to be very rebellious at a young age. I'm not sure if many of you can relate, but growing up without parents will cause a child to be forced to stay in some pretty sketchy places, surrounded by some pretty sketchy people. It's almost as if these types of individuals take advantage of the fact that you don't have a guardian to protect you, and the world is filled with real monsters who prey on the innocence of children, as well as children whose parents have failed to protect them, so to speak. As far as myself, I was forced to experience what I can only describe as a living hell, and had been inflicted with a deep-rooted trauma, some of which I carry still to this day. Anyways, I was 25 years old at the time of this story. I did not have any support at all and began using drugs in order to cope with my trauma and to support my addiction and lifestyle. Honestly, at the time, I was a tattoo artist. When you deal with tattoo customers, the majority of them are in the criminal underworld. Criminals just love tattoos. Bikers, gangsters, you get the idea. I was, however, smoking marijuana though, and some of my customers were weed dealers. I would trade in tattoos for weed, sometimes half a pound or more at a time. I would smoke on it for a couple of months, and when I ran out, I would do the same thing. Call the dealer and ask if he was ready to trade for some ink. I couldn't eat the weed, so sometimes I would get rid of some to my close friends. It just so happens that my close friends were the ones to take away my freedom. One evening, they came over to hang out. We smoked a bunch of weed and we talked as usual. I noticed that they were on edge, and when I asked them what was wrong, they told me that they were having personal problems at home. I had no reason to suspect them of anything else. We had been friends for over 2 years at this time. Sometime during that evening, they asked me if I would sell them a 20-sack. I was a tattoo artist and piercing professional at the time, and at this time I was making great money swinging in, and I had no reason to deal drugs. But I've always been a really good friend, and I have a good heart, and in this particular case, it would be my downfall big time. At the time, I did not realize the length that some departments go through in order to catch a person selling drugs. They'll send multiple confidential informants to purchase from you. They use the dirtiest tactics imaginable. They even provide the cash to the informants and wire them up with hidden cameras and devices, stashed in stuff like ink pens, hats. I've seen cameras on the buttons of a shirt even. This particular day, I was out of marijuana. I wanted to smoke and I was going to get a sack anyway. 2 friends of mine came over and asked me if I wanted to smoke with them and if I could get some weed. So I called up our weed man. The weed man pulled up and I went outside. I purchased 2 $20 bags of weed from them, and I came back inside where these 2 friends of mine were waiting. I put the weed on the table and asked them to pick whichever one they wanted. My friend put the weed in her pocket and went straight towards the door. She was acting so strange. I told her to wait. We could smoke my bag of weed for free. But she was in so much of a hurry that she turned it down. And I knew that was strange, because nobody's gonna turn down free weed. Nobody. I didn't recognize the vehicle they came to my house in. It was all just wrong. I didn't recognize all of these signs at the time, because you don't suspect someone that you've been loyal to betray you so savagely. This caused the narcotics squad to have enough as evidence to form a secret indictment and warrant an arrest. I went to jail on a secret indictment for selling weed. 2 days after they left my house, about 15 vehicles pulled up in the front yard, and about 25 narcotics squad officers and the sheriff's department proceeded to kick my doors in. All of them were carrying automatic AR-style machine guns, bulletproof vests, the works. They put my elderly uncle on his face with a gun and began to tear our house to pieces as I sat in the back of a cop car and watched them proceed with the search warrant. In Alabama, on a secret indictment charge, they'll give you one chance to turn 3 other dealers that you know personally over to them on indictments, and they will dismiss your case. Because I refused, they had the judge and the district attorney place a bond hold on me during the entirety of my case, which was almost 2 years. This means that I was being held without bond. While I was there, my cellmate was a known serial killer. He was responsible for the death of at least 17 people that they knew about. His name was Wilmore Wiggins from Camden, Alabama. Although he was responsible for at least 17 murders, they only had enough evidence on one of the murders to actually prove it. This man had been terrorizing our community for years. I mean years. He was a voodoo practitioner, as were the rest of his family members. One night after lockdown, I was just staring at the roof of my bunk. He was on the top bunk and I was on the bottom. We had already been locked down for a few hours. It was so quiet that you could hear the building settling if you listened intently. In jail, you have nothing but time to think about life, about the direction of your life, about life in general. I was doing just that one night. I did not realize that he was still awake. Through the deafening silence, I heard a voice ask the question, "Hey Big," which is what they called me, by the way. "You ever killed anybody?" I didn't even have to think about it and responded immediately, "Never." He asked me if I ever thought about killing anyone. I responded, "No sir, never." That is when he began confessing to one of the many murders that he had committed. One here in my hometown that he was never even charged with. A murder that took place that is now a cold case. A murder that's never been solved. First off, as I said before, he practiced voodoo, so he began to describe in detail how he got away with his 17 murders. As I began to squint through the darkness of the cell, I noticed in the mirror above the sink that he was now sitting up on his bed. He was looking for someone to talk to in order to release his burden. I was more than happy to listen, as I'm not only into true crime, but also I have always been an understanding person. I'm also a really good listener, and this was something that was very intriguing to me at the moment. It even kind of resembled a horror story or something like a scary movie. It had me on the edge of my bunk. I couldn't move a muscle as I listened with the fullest of intent. Anyways, as I sat there listening, he told me that his voodoo allowed him to get away with the crimes. He said that if you want to get away with murder, you should plant a rose bush in front of your house. He said you can go and get a piece of that person's hair, the person you wish to harm, and bury it at the foot of that rose bush. When you take a piece of sewing thread, and he would tie it and run the thread from the stem of one of the roses and tie it to the doorknob of his home, which was about 15 to 20 feet away. He told me that as long as the thread is in place, he could go out and commit any murder or crime that he wanted, and there would be no retribution. He told me that there was an entity named Zombie. This entity would come inside of him and possess him, giving him supernatural knowledge, wisdom, and insight in order to conceal evidence after his murders. Personally, I am an ordained minister now, And I can tell you from experience that not only can God supernaturally empower a person, but also Satan can as well. The consequences for this is a price that nobody would want to pay. The ones that do, I'm sure, regret it surely eventually. Anyways, he told me that as long as that threat is in place, the spell remains. He told me that he did this every single time he killed somebody, and he got away with over 16 murders. I cannot tell you as a matter of fact whether this voodoo thing is real or not. All I can tell you that is factual is that he 100% believed in it to his soul. My community was terrorized by this man for years and years. Everybody in my town literally knew this man was a serial killer, but they could never prove it. He was just so manipulative and cunning and clever, and had the uncanny ability to be able to manipulate evidence to his advantage in order to conceal his crimes. He told me that one in particular that he knew was in the bar room with his girlfriend. After he went to use the bathroom, talking to his girlfriend, and it infuriated him. After knowing this man for 2 years, I can tell you from experience that he's not the type to fight a man, but he would beat women, and he was very abusive to them mentally and spiritually, as well as physically. He also had a knife on him at all times while he was in jail. He would not fistfight a man. However, he would not hesitate for even one single moment to stab you to death if you crossed him. Anyways, he told me that whenever he saw this particular man talking to his woman in a bar, he got enraged, but he did not do anything about it immediately. He waited an entire month until he had the perfect opportunity to exact revenge on this person. During the course of this time, he had a girl from the neighborhood get a piece of his hair from the pillow and deliver it to him for $20. One night, he got the perfect opportunity. The opportunity that he had been waiting so patiently for. He told me that he was riding around one night, exactly about a month after the incident. He was riding around town after leaving the bar, and he saw that man walking home. He said that it was about 1 o'clock in the morning, so he pulled over and asked the man if he needed a ride. The man was cautious at first, he told me, but he agreed to accept the ride. He got inside of the vehicle and said hello. Then he asked Wilmore, the killer, if he was mad at him for talking to his girlfriend, because he heard from the girlfriend that Wilmore wanted to hurt him. Wilmore assured him that everything was okay, and that he did not take it personal. Anyways, he asked him if he would take him to get some whiskey. The man said sure, so Wilmore went and bought a big bottle of whiskey, and they proceeded to ride around on dirt roads out there in the country getting drunk. That man drank and drank and drank. They played the radio and had a great time. Except, Wilmore was only pretending to drink. He proceeded to get the man drunker and drunker until he couldn't walk. That's when he pulled over in the country and told the man that he needed to urinate. The man said that he had to as well. So when the man got out of the vehicle, Wilmore grabbed a 2x4 out of the back seat, crept up behind the man, and bashed his skull with it. As he's explaining this to me, all I can do is listen in horror. I cannot believe my ears. This man is confessing a whole homicide to me in the most intimate detail. I got chills all over my body. I could not believe that I was listening to something that too much resembled to be something like a horror movie to me. He told me that he hit the man so hard that the board had knocked him out instantly. Then he told me he bashed the man's head at least 25 times after he was dead. He threw the board in the trunk of his vehicle and grabbed a hammer and proceeded to bust this man's teeth out of his head, one by one with the hammer. Then he shaved all of the man's hair off of his head, including his beard and eyebrows, and put it in a bag. Then he reached down and grabbed the man by the legs and drug him off into a cow pasture in the middle of the country and left him there. I was in shock, utter disbelief. I almost didn't even feel real. I felt like I was in a dream hearing this, but I listened intently. People will tell you everything you want to know about them plus more if you could only just close your mouth and open your ears. Most people do not have this ability, but it is a gift that I have been given. In this current situation, it seemed to be a curse though. Anyways, this man's family was looking for him. I was a tattoo artist at the time this happened. I remember it. I was really good friends with the brother of the man who was killed. He used to come and get tattoos from me, and he would cry because they could not find his brother anywhere. They looked for this man for months, but to no avail. Here's the craziest part of all. One night, my friend's mother had a dream. God came to her in a dream and told her where to find her son. Like I said, their family literally had search parties with hundreds of people looking for this man and could not find him anywhere. Anyways, my friend's mom said that God came to her in this dream and told her that her son was in the back of a cow pasture in Possum Bend, way out in the middle of nowhere. She got out of a dead sleep, called her entire family and told them to be waiting outside. She drove by their houses one by one and picked them up in a minivan and drove them out to the exact location that God showed her in the dream. He was right there at the tree in the back pasture, almost nothing left to his remains. When I say that he beat this man's skull flat, it's an understatement. As I said before, I was truly disturbed when I heard this. It still haunts me at night, even today. He told me about a few other murders that he did that he never got caught for. They are truly disturbing. His final victim, a woman and her baby, were burned alive in a trailer. That's not the disturbing part, though. The woman had been dead a week before she was set on fire, and he actually positioned her sitting upright in his car with a seatbelt on as he drove around, so they could be seen together as if she was still alive. He was a master at manipulation and confusing times, dates, and locations of the murders that he committed. He was also an expert at manipulating evidence and disposing of it perfectly in order to conceal his crimes. I spent hundreds of hours alone in a dark cell with this creepy psychopath. I'd love to share the details if anyone is interested in listening. He is still alive and in prison somewhere here in Alabama. He was actually given life without parole after being held in the same jail that I was in for almost 4 years. I have most interesting experiences to share. During the daytime, we would be released from the cell to move freely throughout the day room, watching TV and taking showers. But at 8 p.m. each night, they would lock both of us in a 2-man cell, and the door would not be reopened until 8 a.m. During this time, we had a lot of free time to talk, and it was always dark in the cell at night. The details of some of the crimes he committed are so disturbing that I still take sleeping medication and am currently still seeking psychological help to this very day. It was 1 a.m., and I just got back from the bathroom ready to go back to bed. When I got in my bed, I looked at the window and saw a tall white figure outside. I got out of my bed to see, and I had blurry vision, so I couldn't tell if it was a sign or a human. Because it was so dark outside, the only thing I saw was the white. I decided to go back to bed, and it was still there, and it didn't move. Suddenly, I saw red flashing and didn't want to look at it. After a while, I just kept thinking it was just a pole, and I just closed my eyes. The next day, I look out the window to see the white figure gone. There was no pole or sign. It was just gone. I still remember this day pretty vividly. I was around 14 to 15 years old, and my parents had just gotten invited to a wedding. The wedding took place on a sort of castle located on a waterfront. Anyways, we took a boat to the location, and until then everything seemed normal. I was playing with some other kids at the wedding, and we decided to roam around the surrounding areas of the castle. We did this for hours and everything seemed normal, except for some random drunk women had tried to throw a stone at us, but we brushed it off thinking nothing of it. Later on in the night to the end of the wedding, there was a little celebration where everyone would release a small hot air balloon and let it go into the night sky. All kids, including me, decided to follow these hot air balloons as they lifted off. However, in order to follow, we had to traverse a forest. We all continued running into the forest, and that's where I and 4 more people saw it. As we were sprinting into the forest, we saw a woman sitting down wrapped in a blanket, surrounded by 6 to 8 men with flashlights. As these men heard our footsteps, they flashed their light into our direction, but did not say anything. Complete silence. I stood still. It seemed like they felt like they just got caught doing something and didn't know how to react. I ran away as fast as I could, and the others did the same. Nobody followed us. Nobody ever said anything about this. I was invited to a huge family reunion in Florida, and weirdly enough, we were supposed to wear name tags to identify ourselves, but I went with it. There was going to be a lot of distant cousins, and the idea was to wear name tags to make it easier for everyone to know who's who. I stopped at a grocery store to pick up some ice cream for the reunion. I was sitting in my car checking my texts for a moment, when I noticed suddenly that it looked like someone was blocking the sun. I looked up, and might as well have jumped out of my skin due to the shock. A man in his 50s or 60s was putting his tongue on my windshield. While I'm not sure how he was able to see my name tag, he grinned and asked, "Is your name my name?" I didn't really answer. I just nodded and quickly thought of something to say. I said I was just leaving. Then he asked me where I was going, so I said I'm going to a different store, because they didn't have the ice cream that I was looking for. He said okay and then just walked away. As stupid as this sounds, I decided to drive away and go to a different store nearby because my nerves were rattled. I honestly think what happened was pretty funny in hindsight, but I felt terrible when it was actually happening. My first post ever, so I apologize for any misspelling or confusion in my story. I don't know if this will bring me any peace of mind, but I definitely need to get it off my chest. I had plans to meet up with family after they got off of work, and I didn't want to be pent up in the house until then, so I went to a Ross that was halfway between our meetup spot. I'd rather not give out my actual location. I started off in the men's athletic section to look for things for my husband, and then went to the women's section. As I walked over to the t-shirt rack, I had a lady, late 20s, early 30s, come up to me and ask if I would participate in a survey she was doing about joy. I was skeptical, but I agreed. About halfway through, I noticed she never bothered to write anything down or attempt to record anything I was telling her. The questions revolved around faith, and if I believed in God or if I would want to work more on my belief in Him. I tried to keep things as short and simple as possible, without giving too much information about myself to a stranger. She ended up thanking me for my time, and then walked away. I want to note that she had nothing in her hands, so she wasn't doing any type of shopping. Plus, doing a survey like that in the middle of a store seems a little off. Once I kinda came to my senses, I tried walking around the store to see if I could find her. As I'm walking around, I took notice of a super tall man just staring at the shoes for men. He wasn't picking anything up, literally just staring. He's a notable character. I ended up seeing her in the dress aisle, so I rushed over to the register to pay for what I had. I did notice while I was in line she was talking to another woman,
and the taller man walked over to the worker wearing the loss prevention vest, asked something, and then went to the back of the store. When I got up to the register, I let that lady know of my encounter, and she asked me to describe the lady I came in contact with. She told me she'd let someone know about it, and thanked me. Literally, as I walk out the door, that same tall man walked out with me. No bags or anything in his hands. I immediately turned back around and walked right back into the store. I again shared my story to the loss prevention worker and asked if he or someone could walk me to my car. I don't think he's allowed to leave that spot because he told me I'd have to wait for someone. Thankfully, another worker walked in, and he asked her if she was early for her shift, to which she said yes. She ended up walking me to my car, and I told her my same story. She watched me get in my car, and I immediately locked the doors behind me and took off. I drove for about approximately 10 minutes, went into a random neighborhood, and thankfully no one was following behind me.
All of this could have definitely been nothing, and just myself overthinking it. But with the way the world is, I sadly didn't want to take any chances. I am a 19-year-old female, and I was out to eat with my boyfriend, and the place we were eating at has a live show right next door. We decided to listen outside to some of the bands playing once we were done eating. It was around 9 p.m. at this time. Shortly after going outside, this girl comes up to me and starts talking to me about all kinds of things. She has bright red hair, many piercings and tattoos. The first thing she did was compliment what we were wearing. I wasn't wearing anything special, just a plain pink dress with Crocs. She seemed very friendly and continued on a conversation with us. Mainly me, though. I figured it's because I have piercings and a tattoo. Maybe that's why. I also kind of chalked it up to her being drunk or just overly friendly. Eventually, she asked me a weird question that I didn't really understand and can't recall. Something along the lines of, "What's your purpose here?" or something like that. I just remember not understanding what she was asking me, and just telling her where I worked because it sounded like that's what she was asking me. She said she works in the strip club, in the same town, and to come visit. She left abruptly after, while texting on her phone, and went over to this guy. Me and my boyfriend went to leave. I thought nothing of it, and we passed by them. After turning the corner, my boyfriend told me to check and see if I was being followed. I looked behind my shoulder and didn't see anybody. I walked a little further and looked back again, and there was the guy. He was walking extremely quick and caught up pretty fast. He followed me all the way to my car, which was at least a mile away, until we got in and locked the doors. He was just a couple of feet from my car before he turned around. My boyfriend told me to start the car as soon as possible, and once we left, he told me that he passed by them. He heard the girl say to the guy something along the lines of, "She's a little nervous, but," and he had a bad vibe that I was being sex trafficked, or they were going to try to pimp me out. Maybe snatch me up, I don't know. It wouldn't have been very hard for them to do. He was easily at least double my weight, as I'm only 100 pounds. He was following with a lot of speed, and I mean really, what was the motive? Sorry if this has been long, but I'm just a little creeped out.
Before I got my car in my freshman year of college, I would use Lyft to get to work pretty much every day during the summer. During the winter, fall, I just walked even at night. And in all those Lyft cars and drivers, I never had any noticeable encounters. I've probably been in a couple hundred by now, and aside from the occasional political opinion and speeder, it was all fine. One day I order a Lyft car like normal. It'll be here in 7 minutes. Cool. I walks outside a couple minutes early to go and wait for my driver, and I see a vehicle that pretty much matches the description of mine sitting in my driveway. You know, that little car icon next to the profile that you can use to compare the real one? It was the same color, the same size, and unless you noticed the little details, it pretty much looked the same. But my driver was still 2 minutes away. I choose to ignore him, thinking it's just a funny coincidence, and maybe he's a friend of a neighbor or something. But then he rolls down his window and looks at me, so I go up to talk to him. Maybe he's just lost? And by the way, a different race entirely from my actual driver, so I know for sure this isn't him. But similar skin tones and age. He tells me that he's my driver and pulls out his phone that has my profile like how your driver has to make sure it's you. So in my naive and innocent teenage mind, I think to myself, oh, Lyft must have accidentally sent me 2 drivers, and tell him that he's not the driver I was told I would meet. Right as we were talking, my actual driver pulled up and rolled down his window. I explained the situation and said, I'll probably get in the first guy's car because he was here first. Then my actual driver says that I should probably go with whoever is on my phone. That sounded pretty logical to me and made sense. But before I could turn around and tell the other guy I was going to go ahead and pick the other guy, he drove off. Tinted windows, by the way. It wasn't until I got into the car that my driver brought it to my attention how weird that was. He told me in his 10 years of being a Lyft driver, nothing like that has ever happened to him or anyone he knew. Then it suddenly dawned on me about what might have just happened. The similar car appearance to my actual driver. The fact that he had my info, but I didn't have his. The fact that he was there a couple minutes early, so if I did get in, it wouldn't have intercepted my real driver. Everything. And I almost got into his car. Went to work and I was totally shaken up. I tried making a report to Lyft, but without any evidence or information other than a basic physical description, there wasn't much I could do. My Lyft driver said he would go ahead and tell the story to some other driver friends on a social media forum, Facebook probably, so they can spread the word. So that makes me feel a little better. That driver might have saved my life. I think about that a lot. And hey, my dad heard about it and got me a car, so at least I got something other than trauma. Edit. I've also only told a couple people in real life due to the traumatic and scary nature of the whole thing. Looking back on it now, it was most likely a trafficker, kidnapper. These guys probably have access to Lyft's servers and look for repeating customers like me. I've since deleted the app and my account. Always check the license plates.
I went to a 7-Eleven in Hawaii, and this weird guy was trying to full-blown have a conversation out of nowhere. I was clearly about to enter the store, and yet he was like, "Hey you," and I turned around. He was just trying to say something, but I told him I had to go. When I was in the store, I had bad vibes like he was looking at my car that I arrived in, so I kept my eyes looking out the store. I felt like I looked weird at this point, to be honest. When leaving, he tried to talk to me again. He said, "Hey, you got a lighter?" Because I clearly had one. At this point, I was getting angry that he wouldn't just leave me alone. I say no, then ignore him, and go to put my key in the door. Then he starts walking up to me from behind, so I turn around and give him a mean look and say, "Yeah, you need something?" Then he started talking about my car stickers, and I was like, "Yeah, I have stickers." Then he kept trying to say something, and I just stared at him without saying a word. Then he got the message and walked back. He made me feel like he was trying to get something out of me. Cigarettes, lighters, money, something like that for free. He didn't look homeless, but my gut said that he's probably on drugs and really wants me to give him anything, something, or possibly harm me.
This was back in January early this year. My friend and I had just started working on our film project, and were getting ideas of locations to shoot the film. We drove to a swinging bridge about an hour away from our hometown. It was your usual, unsturdy bridge that was about 400 feet long and 60 feet above water. This bridge was only meant for walking, no running, biking, etc. Across it, it was parallel to another bridge, one made for vehicles. My friend and I got a couple shots of the bridge itself before we made our way to the other side, where there were train tracks in a neighborhood. About halfway across the bridge, we heard yelling coming from the other one. We looked, and it appeared to be a lady waving her arms like she was trying to get our attention. She called out a name what I thought was Hayden or Aiden, which both of those were neither mine or my friend's name. We yelled back, "We're not them," thinking that would be the end of the conversation. The woman just stood there, staring at us. We tried to shrug it off as we thought it had been settled, but then the woman takes off full speed running across the bridge, in the same direction we were going. We thought it was a strange, but we just laughed it off and carried on. We made it to the other side of the bridge and began shooting footage near the train tracks. I know it's unsafe, but this was a regular crossing point for the bridge trail. While in the middle of a scene, I heard a familiar voice yell from behind me. It was the same woman yelling the same thing. She stood on top of the hill of that neighborhood across the tracks. Again, we yelled back that we don't her and we're not who she thinks we are. This woman takes off running once again, but this time towards us. This frightened us because why would this woman need to get to us that bad? My friend and I quickly grabbed our things and headed for the swinging bridge. Even knowing we weren't supposed to run across, we walked super fast, which made the bridge sway. It's like our fight or flight kicked in. The lady had caught up to the start of the bridge by the time we made it halfway across, still yelling, but this time it was in a hatful voice. This was when I turned around to look once to see how far the distance between us was. The lady had stopped there at the start of the bridge, and I noticed she was holding something behind her back. Even though she had stopped running after us, we continued to bolt across the bridge. We turned back once we reached the other side to see the woman still standing there, fiddling with something in her hands. My friend pulled out her phone and began recording the woman. This made her turn back immediately and walk the other way. We never found out why she chased us or what she was holding in her hand. Sometimes I think back and wonder if maybe she needed help. But why not scream for help? I just find it strange that after we told her multiple times that we weren't the people she thought we were, and she still followed us. I had difficulty sleeping about a week after this incident, as I couldn't get the idea out of my head of what this woman wanted to do with us. I had never been so scared in my entire life. So I took the bus as usual to get home, and this guy sitting next to me gets off at the same bus stop. I know pretty much the entire neighborhood, and I don't think I ever saw anyone of his nationality. During the way home, I was at the phone speaking another language, so this guy, after we get down from the bus, makes a sound to get my attention and asks me where I'm from. I should have just walked away, but in this situation I get scared and don't act rationally. So I answer him. Then he asks me where I live, and I tell him where I live without pointing to my house. Then he proceeds to ask me if he can get with me to do something, which he says in another language. At that point, I start to laugh hysterically and keep telling him I have a boyfriend. I know I should have just threatened him to call the police or something, but I got scared and kinda didn't want him to turn violent for not telling him what he wanted to hear. Then I try to leave, but he followed me. Then I stop to confront him, and he wants to give me a hug and say that I'm so beautiful. I keep replying that I can't, to which then he offers me to shake hands, which I nervously agree just to get out of the situation. Then I change paths in hopes that he wouldn't watch me, go home, or return back after. Should I learn how to stop acting like a total idiot in these situations? Yes. Should I be concerned
That he will begin to stalk me? I don't know. This happened a couple of years ago, but I often think about it and what this person's intentions were. Disclaimer, it isn't the most exciting story. So a couple of years ago, probably 2018, me, a 23-year-old male, I'm outside of my mother's house close to midnight. It's dark in a neighborhood, no one outside, and it's quiet and chill. I'm smoking a joint by my car, just listening to music and vibing quietly. I see a person walking up the street towards me. Nothing to be alarmed about. She gets close. She's a cute mid-30s woman. Sees me smoking and asks if I have a cigarette. She was friendly. I say no, but we have a nice quick chat. Plus, every young man has fantasies of cute women walking towards them. You never know. But definitely just a fantasy and wishful thinking. I wasn't going to that route. So, during our quick chat, probably only a minute or so in, she says, "One moment, let me make this call." So she calls her husband. I don't recall how I knew it was her husband, but I believe she mentioned him in our chat. This is an older memory. This is what creeped me out. She says on the phone, "Hi, honey. OMG, I think I found the one." She was excited about it, but in a weird way. Hard to explain, but it sounded sinister. It creeped me out and gave me red flags. Plus I'm thinking, found what? I already said I didn't have a cigarette. Plus, she is walking around the streets. She and her husband are looking for something. What does that even mean? So, while she was still on the phone, I just turned around, went inside, and locked the door. I don't know what to think of it to this day. What could she have meant? Best case, she wanted a three-way with her husband, which I'm not into. Worst case, they were gonna rob me or do something awful and weird. What do you think her deal was? So I work at a bar that has a back alley that leads to a small secluded parking lot. There are several large trash cans and many small ones, and there are some addicts, homeless folks, etc., who will come to the alley pretty often. Usually they're pretty harmless and just look through the trash or ask for $1, but sometimes they aren't. Tonight was one of those times. I went out the back to throw out a bag of trash when I noticed a man walking quickly by the farthest group of garbage cans from the back door, which also happens to be the house, the one that I use. He looked in my direction. I don't think he knew I could see him. And then, as he saw me walking toward him and the trash can, he quickly and quietly hid himself in the dark behind the trash cans. I didn't see where he ended up, but it scared me so much. I was the only one around, and I knew he was hiding because I would have seen him walk past if not. It was the only way to go. I left my bag of trash right where it was and immediately walked back inside. I hope he left soon after I went back in. Yesterday, after leaving the public restroom, a man who had exited the men's room started to follow me. He called out, "Hey," but I didn't respond as it seemed flirtatious. He came closer and asked, "Hey, what are you doing tonight?" Repeating this a few times, I finally said, "Leave me alone." Then he shockingly asked, "Should I kidnap you?" Thankfully, I was headed towards a crowded area. The people around me seemed concerned, which I believe made him back off. It's infuriating to deal with such comments. Approaching someone is one thing, but not stopping when I show no interest and then threatening to kidnap me is a whole new level of entitlement. I'm a 24-year-old female, and I moved into my first apartment by myself. I usually have roommates, but my last situation, I was harassed by 2 guys in my house, and also by a 60-year-old woman who was a severe alcoholic and drug addict. Long story. I've been here for 2 months, and it's been good. I love the place, the apartment, the location. But yesterday, I got the crap scared out of me when I received a knock on my door at 3 a.m. I live on the top floor of a 25-floor building and was the first to move in after renovations. So, there's only 4 to 5 people on my whole floor. I had no texts, no calls from anyone that I knew about coming over. First they knocked. I was silent. They knocked again. It sounded like a man knocking. I called my mom, telling her this situation and that I was utterly terrified being a young woman. They waited a few minutes and knocked again. My mom called the police for me, and 2 women officers came up. I told them what happened, and they were super kind about the situation. The only person who I could have maybe expected to knock, the only person who had access, was the doorman. This doorman in particular has always had a strange vibe. He never talked much, but he was always watching me. I'd go to the elevators and he'd get out of his chair to stare at me, waiting for them to open. He is a 28 to 32-year-old dude. I'm not sure exactly how old. And he's a pretty tall African-American man. He'd always check me out, and while he wouldn't say much, he'd flirt. 2 days ago, I was going out with some girlfriends, and I was dressed in a tight and short black dress with black boots. He seemed really interested in me at that point, and definitely spent some extra time staring at me. I don't really think much of it. So after talking to the police, I went downstairs and asked him, "Hey, so I got a knock on my door at 3 in the morning. Was that you by chance?" And he immediately said, "Yeah, it was." I was like, why were you knocking on my door at 3 a.m.? And he says, "Well, it wasn't 3 a.m. It was more like 2:30. I was just checking up on you." I said, "Why?" And he mumbled something under his breath. I'm like, "What did you say?" He said, "I don't know." I gave him leeway and I said, "Because you thought I wasn't okay?" And he says, yeah. And I said, "Why wouldn't you think I was okay?" Again, he said, "I don't know." I told him that it really scared me. I also said, "I see you 3 to 4 times a day. Why couldn't you just talk to me down here?" I don't know. Looking back, I also received a knock on my door at 12:30 a.m., but it was very faint, enough where I thought he was knocking on someone else's door. So weird. After I told him not to knock on my door again, he called me and left a voicemail on my phone. I noticed the random number and realized that he'd called me at midnight and at 3 a.m. I'm super scared because I live alone. Ring doorbells aren't allowed in the building unless requested, and also the management company keeps hiring guys like this. The last guy was fired. I'd ideally like to actually end my lease, even if he gets fired, which he definitely will considering the last guy who wasn't nearly as bad got fired. That would be good. But he now knows where I live, what car I drive, when I come and go, and also has access to the magnets to get up the elevator. He even asked me a few days ago, "What's your unit number?" so we could come up. Almost like it was premeditated. I'm super scared and hear stories about this all the time. I'm terrified that he'll have a maintenance key or something, come into my apartment and hide and wait for me to get home. A young girl was just killed by someone who worked in her building. What do you think I should do? I wasn't sure which sub to post this to, but since it's not exactly my story, even though I was involved, I'm posting it here. Yesterday I celebrated my birthday. I invited my ex-girlfriend Emma, because we're actually still really close friends. She took the train to get me, which takes about 1.5 hours and requires changing trains twice. She left around midnight and should have been home around 1:30 to 1:45 a.m. Shortly after 1 a.m., she texted me about a weird dude following her after striking up an unsettling conversation with Emma about whether she was homosexual. And then she answered truthfully that no, she's just trans, hoping he would go away if she was friendly enough. He went on about why she was trans even though she knew it was satanic. He also told her that he'd already noticed her on the train that same morning, which just strikes me as especially creepy. She got off at a stop, intending to wait for her subway home, but he got off with her and wouldn't leave her alone. The next subway to her place wouldn't come for another 25 minutes, and the stop was deserted. She sent me multiple anxious voice messages until she eventually called me, borderline crying and panicking, saying she had to run away from the station and was now lost with little idea of where she was, even less of an idea of how to get home, and her phone was only on 8% battery. She didn't have any money to call a cab either. She couldn't go back to the station because this guy was presumably still there, and he had followed her when she had tried to just take the next train in the direction that she had come from, in an attempt to try and get away from him. I advised her to call the police, which she did. They apparently came, took her statement, and left again, leaving her there on the outskirts of a big city with still no idea how to get home. I told her to use Google Maps to try and get home and try to save battery, but to update me periodically. She called me again a few minutes after, saying that she was 45 minutes away on foot from her home, but that thankfully she had managed to reach her mother, and she was coming to pick up Emma from where she was. I stayed on the line with Emma until her mom got there. I'm so angry. Emma already struggles with severe anxiety and agoraphobia. The fact that she managed to make it to my birthday party was an achievement for her. This isn't going to help at all. Why do people like this even exist? I'm a 24-year-old guy, and I'm not great at writing things out like this, but I just wanted some advice as I'm a socially awkward person. So I decided to go into town the other day and took the train in. I arrived at the station, got my ticket, then waited for the train. I was approached by a man in, let's say, his 60s. I must have been someone that he knew or seen before, because he said, "Wow, I haven't seen you in some time." I replied, "Sorry, I think you may have the wrong person." He continued to push the conversation by saying, "Oh, you must have a twin." I laughed and brushed it off. Once the train arrived, I got on and sat down. I sat down in a 2-seater chair. The man sat down next to me and asked me my name. Trying to be nice, I replied my name and he said his name. He asked me a few questions and I gave answers. All up to this point is found fine. He asked to use my phone to make a call, which I didn't see an issue with. After this, he sent a text message which was fine. His own phone beeped. He then turned to me and said, "I have your number now. We can catch up later." He had called himself on my phone to get my number. I tried to play it off coolly, but I was pretty creeped out, and I couldn't leave since he had blocked me in. He finally got off at his station. Straight away, he texted me, and each day he has been texting me to come over to his house, or to go out with him for coffee. I felt bad for him because he seemed lonely, but it just feels really odd and creepy. I just wanted some people's thoughts, as I've never been in this situation before, and don't really have friends to talk to about this. Edit. I really appreciate the comments and responses to my boast. I have blocked him after a small exchange. I was trying to be nice, then I tried to ignore him, but he became really aggressive and called me and became verbally aggressive as well. I will be reporting this to the police and changing my number. Thank you for making me feel justified in my response. Transportation in the Philippines were made easier because there are motorcycle taxis here, and they are much cheaper compared to Uber or Grab cars. You just need to book a rider through an app, just like how you would book Uber in your country. I'm used to taking them whenever it's not raining, and it's a faster way to get to my workplace, but that is just the tip of the iceberg to my story. One particular night, I was craving for something to eat. It was around 1 o'clock a.m. It took me an hour or two of scrolling through my phone to look for food to satisfy my cravings, when I decided to just go to 7-Eleven, which is just a few blocks away from the village that I live in. I decided to just walk. The evening breeze was nice. I reached the highway and I walked to the nearest pedestrian lane. The streets were a bit dim, when suddenly a man on the motorcycle stopped by me, and he was urging me to ride on his motorcycle. Motorcycle taxis here have uniforms, and I know that he is a phony. 7-Eleven was still 2 blocks away. I politely brushed him off and said that I want to walk. He took off, and I felt a rush of relief. I enjoyed the rest of my walk. When I came to this block, where only one street lamp was working, and the light from it was not a big help, my heart suddenly beat fast and I was sweating. Mind you, it was cold during that time. Something is stopping me from taking a step further. My legs felt heavy, but I did my best to walk because I was really hungry during that time. I don't have perfect vision. I can't see anything that is more than 4 feet away from me. When I was about to reach the corner where the only working street lamp was standing, it was the guy from earlier, and he was smoking something. I squinted my eyes and he was smoking crack. I walked faster until I reached 7-Eleven. I shopped for my food, and when I went to the cashier to pay for my stuff, there were 3 people ahead of me. He went behind me, and he was holding a roll of aluminum foil. I was shaking, and I was about to cry, when suddenly my childhood friend who was a police officer came in and he greeted me. I greeted him back. My friend offered me a ride because he had just clocked out and told me to wait for him. He went to the drinks section of the store, and the guy whispered in my ear, "Suerte mo miss, hindi kiti, marape ngayon," which translates to, "You're lucky, miss, that I can't R-word you right now." Thank you so much for listening to the stories in this video. I hope you enjoyed them. I also hope that you enjoy the extra rain sounds at the end. Get a good night's sleep, everyone, and I'll read to you in the next video. Bye-bye now.